All right, so this knife thoughts video is one I'm pretty excited about because it's on this knife right here. And if you've been following Demko knives, you probably know what this is, but this is the Demko AD20.5. So the AD20.5 is the first production knife from Demko knives. Andrew Demko was a longtime designer for Cold Steel knives, but with their sale to GSM, he's kind of moved over into having his own line of knives. He has been making custom knives or mid-tech knives for a long time, but this is the first run of production knives that he's making, and it's one that people are really excited about, I think. The first thing I wanted to say here is that I got this knife from River's Edge Cutlery. Like I said, this is a highly anticipated knife, so these actually went on sale from River's Edge Cutlery while they were still at Blade Show, where they got these from Demko Knives. And that was on Sunday, I believe, and it got to me on a Wednesday. So really quick shipping, and I've had other good experiences from River's Edge Cutlery. I actually first heard about them because I was in the area for a jiu-jitsu competition and looked up to see if there were knife stores nearby. And since then, they've come out with some highly, sought after and liked Spyderco exclusives and things like that, but I have had good experiences from them, and I appreciate them sending it out pretty quickly here. So you can check out River's Edge Cutlery. But let's take a look at the knife here. So it comes in a pretty substantial box, and then not actually in the box, it was in the shipping box, but it came with this shark lock sticker, which is really what drew me to this knife, the shark lock from Demko Knives. And then inside the box itself was this zipper case with a removable patch. So if you use these Velcro patches, you could use that, on your other gear. And then in the pouch is, of course, the knife, and then also a microfiber cloth. I haven't taken that out. I'm going to leave it in for now, but pretty, again, substantial zipper pouch. And here's the knife. So the AD20.5 is a scaled down production version of the mid-tech AD20. And it is scaled down quite a bit. It's a relatively thin knife, and it has about a 3-inch blade with about a 4.5-inch handle or closed length. So relatively small, a little smaller than I typically carry at 3.5 to 4 inches usually on my preferred blade length size, but I really wanted to give it a try because of that really cool shark lock that you got to see right there. So the shark lock is something that I follow Andrew Demko on Instagram. I saw when he was first bringing it out, patenting it and everything, and it was intriguing, but I didn't really understand how it worked. So I wasn't real sure on it, but it seemed like people were really excited about it, and it seemed like it was at least very smooth and cool and unique in the operation. But finally, I saw a demonstration of how it worked, and the only thing I can do to try to help you understand how it works is actually show you the box here. So let's see, where's the best view? So right here, you can see there's this lock bar, which is this right here, and it engages with the tang of the knife as so. There's a little lip here on the tang, and then there is a stop pin that the blade actually stops on there. So it's not, going against that lock bar, it's going against the stop pin. And then what you do is you pull this back and then up, and that's what this lip here is for on the lock bar. You pull it back and up, and the pin right here slides into this little slot, and that disengages from the lock bar from the tang of the knife and allows it to unlock. And what holds this in place is a coil spring. So it's an interesting design. It has some, similarities between the plunge lock, the classic plunge lock, and then also a couple really well-known locks, the axis lock, which is, now other people are using, and the cage ball bearing lock. So some kind of well-known locks from Benchmade and Spyderco. But really, I think that it kind of takes the best of both worlds on this. And the reason for that is because on the axis lock, it's a really fun, easy lock to use. You can pull it back really easily to open and close it. And it's what a lot of people call fidget friendly, right? You can open and close it very easily, you know, sit and just flip it open and closed, and it's fun to use. I don't use the term fidgety a whole lot, but I guess it's a fun lock. But the downside, and I have actually personally never had this happen, but I think it's a theoretical concern, and some people have actually literally had it happen, is that the spring used for this is what Benchmade calls an omega spring. So it curls around this bar and then has a curl in the horizontal plane here. And those, you know, there have been reports of those breaking. It's not the most robust spring, and it's not housed within the lock, but rather within the handle. So that's kind of the downside to the axis lock. Now, the cage ball bearing lock is a little bit maybe more similar in looks in the back spring to the shark lock, in that it has this lock bar here. And the reason for that is because instead of an omega spring or a horizontal coil, it has a vertical coil. And you can actually see that in there, that vertical coil that goes along a bar. And then there's a ball, a literal ball bearing in there, which is caged by this plastic kind of grip here. And so it pushes the ball against the tang of the knife as it falls. But you can see that it goes against this lock bar instead of a stop pin. And another downside to this is that it's just not as easy to open and close. So you can for sure pull it back and swing it open, but it's just a little harder to pull to open and close the knife. And it's also, instead of metal, it's plastic, which, you know, some people see as a downside. I don't think it's a practical issue. Again, kind of similar to the coil spring, at least for me, or I'm sorry, the omega spring. But it doesn't look or maybe even feel as nice, and there have been some reports of those breaking and such. And the other thing, is that it's definitely harder to do with one hand than the axis lock. The axis lock you can generally do with either hand here on either side, whereas the cage ball bearing, you generally are going to have to use both hands, both fingers, and use them on both sides there. So both really good locks. I like them both. I really like both of these knives. This is the Benchmade Griptilian, if you're not familiar, and the Spyderco Manix 2 Lightweight. But they do have, you know, maybe some downsides, at least theoretical downsides, if not super practical. Now, the shark lock is really cool, I think, because it uses this moving lock bar, and within that there is a coil spring, but it's a housed coil spring. So if you look inside, you can't see that coil spring. So that's a little different than on the cage ball bearing lock. You don't really have to worry about that spring getting any, you know, debris in it or anything like that. But you do get the durability, the reliability of that vertical coil spring versus the omega spring. Now, at the same time, it's really, really easy to use to open and close with one hand. Very, very easy to do it. You can do it with pretty much any finger that you have any dexterity in whatsoever, and easily with either hand here. So it's very, very easy to open, and I would say just as easy, if not maybe a little bit easier, than the axis lock. At the same time, it should be pretty much as strong as both of these. So it works in a very similar way, with this lock engaging against the tang of the knife. As long as this spring that's housed inside this bar continues to have spring tension, which it should continue to push this against and keep the knife from unlocking. And then similar in a little bit, not quite as similar because it's a different style of lock, but similar to another lock designed by Andrew Demko, the Triad lock. It goes against a stop pin instead of a back spring, like on the cage ball bearing lock or a typical lockback knife. So it has a little bit of that kind of design influence or evolution of other Andrew Demko knives. So I've really, people have been talking highly of this shark lock, and I have to echo that. I really have enjoyed it. I've had this knife only for about a day, but it's super fun, easy to use, easy to open and close if you know what it is. Now, I will say that I showed this knife to my wife and she thought that that was a flipper. If you pull on that like a flipper, the knife will open, but not the whole way. It'll just swing. So that's something to be aware of, that you do have to kind of know what you're supposed to do with it. But as long as you do, I think it's super, super easy to use and very, very well done also. That's another thing I want to say about this knife, is that it seems really well made. So the lock is just like super smooth, the pivot and lock. Even when unlocked here, it has no side-to-side blade play at all. It is very, very solid, and is, as you've been seeing, I mean, as drop closed as I think it could possibly be. I would say that it has that glassy feel. A lot of people, use that term glassy, and it really has a preference for the closed position. This lock really holds that closed. And I think that's in part because of the vertical coil spring, but also in part because it is so smooth at the pivot. So just a really, really nicely done pivot. Very, very smooth, very easy to open. Now, this slot is kind of a design aesthetic from Andrew Demko. I don't really think you would use that to open it in this case, because this knife has this thumb stud. The thumb stud is not the stop pin, as you can see, as I've discussed. So you would generally use the thumb stud. Very easy to use. Again, well, I blocked it that time, but maybe not as easy to use on the back, but very easy to use. It's a pretty substantial thumb stud, but it does have this slot that, as you can see, you can use that slot to open it. And Andrew Demko does make some mid-tech knives that only have that slot. So I'll be interested to see if he makes any production knives with the slot and without the thumb stud. So very well made. You can see that it is nicely centered. It came nicely centered. Now, these are Grivery scales, so they are an injection molded plastic basically, but they're very, very nice feeling. They have this cool diamond type pattern, and it does say AD20.5 on the clip fall area there, and then Demko knives on the front side and Wampum PA on the backside, which I do appreciate that this knife is designed in Pennsylvania, where I am, even if it's not made there. Now, it has this clip. This clip is a little weird looking, I would say, to be honest, but I think will work completely fine. You will have about an inch of handle sticking out, but that allows this lanyard hole to actually be functional, whereas some lanyard holes are not really functional because they're covered by the pocket. So not a deep carry clip at all, but perfectly fine clip, and it does seem to be reversible. Actually, no, it's not reversible. Sorry, I haven't tried to reverse it. I'm right-handed and haven't considered that until right now, to be honest. So I don't think that that is reversible, but seems like it would work well and is just in general made well. The grind seems relatively even. You can see on both sides, relatively even grind. No swedging really. It does have some jimping, and I like the jimping because it's not overly done. It's not super, super aggressive like some jimping. But it does give you a little bit of purchase, and generally seems like a well-made knife. The machining looks good and everything. You can see inside there it actually has the patent number, and then that it does have full liners. So it's not like this is a flimsy knife. Some knives that only have, injection molded plastic handles feel a little flimsy. This knife definitely doesn't. I was surprised because it is a relatively small knife. I was surprised at how substantial this knife feels. It does not feel, wimpy. It feels pretty solid, even though those full steel liners are machined out for some weight reduction. So, it's about 3.5 ounces from what I've seen. I haven't weighed this one, but other reviews have said that. So you get about an ounce per, actually, I guess that's a little bit more than an ounce per inch of blade, but oh well, I don't worry about weight like some people do. Now, coming to the thing about this knife that I was really worried about after seeing the size of it, some size comparison pictures, and that is the main handle length. So while the handle is plenty big enough, I mean, it's, pretty close in size, overall length, to the handle of the full-size Griptilian. The thing is that this handle design makes it so you're definitely not getting the full handle length in your actual main grip area. And that often will make a knife not fit well in my hands. I have, wide and, let's be honest, a little bit fat hands. So I was a little bit concerned about that. And to be honest, it is pretty concerning. I'm not really sure that this knife is going to feel good in use for me. I have not used this knife yet. So yeah, we're 15.5 minutes in and I'm saying I haven't used the knife. I'm sure I'll get a comment about that, but it's just how it is. I think I can put together some pretty, coherent thoughts on a knife without using it. But as you can see, my pinky finger sits right on that point there. So not super comfortable, and definitely with gloves on, I don't know how well that would fit in my hand. And even without gloves, I don't use gloves that often. It's just something where I don't think it fits my hand that well. I was concerned about it because I saw a comparison to a Manix, and the Manix lightweight, well, the Manix 2 in general, is right on the edge for me. It is big enough, but it is definitely right on the edge. As you can see, I do get my pinky in there, but it's pretty tight. And to show you a comparison, there is definitely less main grip area on the Demko AD20.5 than on the Spyderco Manix 2. So relatively small grip area. And the reason for that is in part because it has this area here, so kind of a butt where there's some dead space. And then it has this choil. The choil is usable. You can definitely choke up on this knife. But it's unfortunate because I love this lock. I really love the lock. And I like the design, actually. I think that this, if it was a little bigger, it would really, really lock your hand in there really well for solid use. But it is just a little bit small for my hand. And it's something that there's a couple ways that could be dealt with. One real simple way is that you can just make the knife bigger, keep the same proportions of the same design and make the knife bigger, which we know can be done because it's the AD20, the knife that this is based off of. And I do have good news. I hope this is okay to share. It didn't, he didn't say that it was a secret or anything, but I posted a quick overview of this on Instagram, and Demko Knives messaged me saying that he also prefers a little bit bigger of a knife and that there are plans to make an AD20 sized production knife. Now, I don't know if it'll have all the same features or anything like that. So definitely if you want a knife like this, go out and get the AD20.5. But it does seem like there will be a larger, more similar to the AD20 knife coming from Demko Knives in a production version. And that's great for me because as I said to him, the AD20s are super cool, but they are expensive. They are not cheap at all. The Grivery versions are, I think, in the $350 range. I did consider getting one of those just because I really wanted to try this shark lock, and I do like the design, but it's just a little out of my price range. And they go up from there all the way to, in the thousands, I think, or 1,000 something for the all titanium version. So I am excited. I'm really excited that they're going to be doing a bigger version of something like this. The other way that you could, kind of mitigate that issue, which seems like it's not an issue for that many people because so many people are excited about the size of this knife. But another way is that you can just use up all of this space. So bring this a little closer to the end of the knife, but it might not look as good. You could also take this choil out, but I think the choil is part of the design aesthetic, and it also is functional. The other way, though, is something that a lot of companies do, which is having this be a little bit downturned. So if this was a little bit more downturned, this wasn't such a big turn here, you probably could get your finger out over that and have it be comfortable. But the problem is this is such a big upturn here that the downturn doesn't really do too much. Whereas this is a much more gradual upturn, so it feels pretty good in the hand for me. And this is the Wii Banter. Another kind of example, which is kind of an extreme example, is the Spyderco Roberos with this really big upturn, but then also a really big downturn. And you can hang your finger off the edge. And then the Benchmade Griptilian, actually doesn't have too much longer, but it fits a little bit better because it doesn't have that hard upturn. Now, an interesting example, I don't still have the knife, but the Spyderco Para 3 is a knife that does have a big upturn here, or a relatively big upturn, but not big enough that the downturn doesn't, help, because it's actually a little smaller. So this knife, I almost get all 4 fingers. On the Para 3, that upturn is right about here at the 3rd finger. So the 4th finger just kind of hangs off. And that would be maybe if it was about this size in grip. You see that? So if you get the 3 fingers into this area, then the 4th finger can kind of hang off and it can be a little bit more comfortable. But I did actually get rid of the Para 3 because of that. So for me, this knife is a little small. For a lot of people, though, this is a perfect EDC size. I've seen several YouTube reviewers, some of the biggest ones, really lauding the choice that Demko Knives made to make this knife a little bit smaller than the AD20 because they prefer a smaller knife. So for a lot of people, this is probably a perfect EDC size. Definitely for a lot of people, it's going to fit their hand better than it does mine because I have these, again, big hands. And I think most people will really like it. But for me, it's a little bit small. So I probably am going to move this along and wait for the larger version to come out. But I'm still really glad that I got this knife because it is so cool. It is so unique. This lock is, I think, a really big innovation in the industry. And I'm really looking forward to not just the bigger version of this knife, but what all, Demko Knives has in store for the future in their new production line of knives. So happy to get this knife again from River's Edge Cutlery. It's a cool knife, just maybe a little small for me. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, go ahead and like it. You can subscribe to my channel and click the bell to get notifications when I post new videos. You can also check out my Instagram and Facebook at Knife Thoughts and my website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like this and knife-related topics. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.